am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Mariette Martinez. After 20 plus years of working with small businesses as an accounting and tax advisor, her entrepreneurial spirit has taken her on a path from practitioner to educator. She is the founder of Master Your Books, a learning community for bookkeeping professionals to become more confident, knowledgeable, and connected with themselves and their small business clients. Her passion is as an educator and mentor to guide bookkeepers as they step fully into the role of the new age bookkeeper. During my interview with Mariette, we discussed the influence of her entrepreneurial grandparents and mother that had on her journey of creating businesses of her own. We discuss her journey of taking risks that she needed to, finding the right mentors and community along the way in order to create the success she desires. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. And today I'm with Mariette Martinez. And Mariette, do you want to start off and give us a little background on yourself?
Sure. So first of all, I want to thank Amy for inviting me. Actually, we were joking around before. She sent an email and I missed it. And I was wondering if she thought like, what in the world? How did she not respond to me? We've known each other for quite a while now. So so just a quick intro, because I believe we're going to go a little bit more into background in a few minutes. I am an accountant of over 20 years that has transitioned into a public educator over the last 6 years. I'm a mom of 3 kids, a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a surprise 4-year-old that came late in the game, but he has us running around in circles. And I'm from Southern California, and I've been serving small business owners my whole life. Actually, I hope Amy and I can go a little bit more into our stories because we actually have some similarities. My mom immigrated in the 40s and 50s with 11 siblings, and all of them chose entrepreneurship to build wealth. And my mom actually chose the restaurant business, and she did that for over 30 years. So it's funny when I say it, it's all I knew. Like when I speak to entrepreneurs now, they have such a different way of joining and like taking the leap to entrepreneurship. But I actually thought that's what everybody did.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's what you do. That's how you build wealth. That is your path. So obviously I hope we talk a little more about that because I definitely think I have that different nuance in my life in regards to how other entrepreneurs have walked into the journey. But again, I appreciate that because I also have taken a step back and now say I have to connect with my entrepreneurs differently because they have a different story. And so I appreciate my story, but I also know that it's not the common story as I thought it was for like 20 years.
For sure. Yeah. And as you can already see, Mariette has more passion and purpose behind everything that she does. And she brings so much joy to every conversation and every room she's in. So excited to have her on and hear more of her story today. And one of the things about what you said that has hit me for a while is one of my last roles, as you knew, before I went back out on my own was working for Xero, which I was in a global job at that time. And that was a big aha moment for me. I actually came back and wrote an article after one of my first trips going to New Zealand and Australia and the UK and just meeting with all of these accountant entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs around the world. And I kind of felt like we lost that entrepreneurial spirit in America. Same as you, had immigrant grandparents and parents that were not immigrant parents, but parents that were entrepreneurs. My grandparents were entrepreneurs. But there was a huge risk in coming to another country. So risk was in the blood.
Yes.
Like, what did you have to lose? What haven't you already lost by, coming over? Versus now when people take the leap to entrepreneurship, it's, am I going to be safe? Is it right? Trying to get, like all these guarantees into entrepreneurship that, immigrants just, they never even thought about. So love to hear your story on this, because I think that's just so representative of that spirit.
Yeah, I wrote that down. I noticed you and I have that. We're going to write down things that call to one another. And I'm the same way. When you said risk, I got the goosebumps, Amy. I literally got the goosebumps. And it's like, I even, and I will probably get emotional because this is in our bloodline. Like, we've seen it. We lived it. This was our table conversation. This is just how they would wake up. It's like, we got to get this done. They would push through the fear. Like, it was a consistent, especially in my family, as I mentioned. My grandmother, way before her time, was an entrepreneur. So my mother's mother in the 30s and 40s, she had 11 children and she adopted another one. So 12.
Oh, wow.
And she just didn't have enough, right? And all of them, chose different entrepreneurial paths. So this is what they talked about.
What was your grandmother's business?
She was a tailor. So she actually would, sew clothes for people in her community. And then she actually taught 3 of her kids how to be tailors. And one of my uncles is a very famous tailor out in Nashville, Tennessee. And so, but like you said, they didn't allow themselves to be scared. And I knew they were scared. Of course, they were all of my mom's siblings were immigrants. So I'm actually first generation here in the US.
And where did they come from?
They all came from Mexico.
Okay.
So they all came from a city called Tecalitlan in Mexico, and immigrated from the 40s to the 60s. And so, yeah, I agree with you, Amy. It's like now, and I think that's why I tell you, Amy, I have to step back and really understand entrepreneurship now.
Yeah.
Because before, when people talked about entrepreneurship, it was like the American dream. You got to get out there. You got to take those risks. You got to get uncomfortable. Like, that was just something you knew you had to do. Now I feel like we're convincing people to do that.
Yeah.
We're teaching them how to do
in
that.
essence, they were striving for a better life and believed they could by taking those risks, versus if I'm safe in a career and I'm going to entrepreneurship, that's a big difference, right? Like, It's my money I'm putting on the table, and it's whether I know how to run a business in the way that it needs to run. And I will say, my grandfather was a CPA. And if you look back in history in the 30s, being a CPA, I'm not going to say it's easy, but compared to all the regulation and compliance that an accountant, an entrepreneur have to go through today versus starting a business in the early 1900s was a lot different, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right about that. I think, and I talk to my community a lot, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, about my learning community, but I'm trying to be empathetic to don't overthink it. We all do feel scared. By the way, like 100 years ago, when you have a business, you feel scared. Today, you still feel scared. That's like a certainty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's what you do with that fear. It's what you do with knowing that, we're all here feeling that, but you need to push through that. Actually, perfect podcast name, right? It's breaking the beliefs, break that out of you. You have to. That is a key indicator, I believe, of a passionate entrepreneur. I don't think passionate is like how I'm expressing myself. That is a passionate way of expressing myself. Passion is a product of breaking through that. That's what I truly believe passion is.
Yeah. And for sure, one of the things that when I'm talking to people about whether to start a business or not, especially if you're coming from a corporate environment, in a corporate world, you're doing all this analysis and presentation on whether, you can push through an initiative or whether something will work. When you're an entrepreneur, 50% is gut, if not more, that you may not have proof. There's something in you that knows that it's going to drive to success, and to believe in that and not fight it. And it's when we get in our way of the self-talk, and so forth. But if you are listening to your gut and your gut's telling you, yeah, I'm going to be in danger going this path, then you should listen to that gut. But too much of the time, I think we want to prove everything. And that's very hard to do when you're starting out a business, because, whatever business you think you're going to start, it's going to be something else in a year, something else in 2 years. It depends where your customers take you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, two things I just have to just reiterate from being in the business for over 20 years is, number one, yes, 50% gut. And, I have people tell me all the time, because I'm a big believer in mentors and coaches, and they will tell me, Mariette, you just said about 3 times, like, I think I know this, but they're like, well, if you think you know this, that's your gut. Like, go with it. Like, you just need me to tell you to go with it because you just said it 3 times in the same conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's the gut. That's the gut you're talking about. And I appreciate that. And the other thing is, you're right. Like, you go out there and know that what you're doing today is not going to be what you're doing next year or the year after. Like, it's such a journey. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So let's back up.
Yeah.
So to get to how you even were kind of bred in this world. So your mother, you said, had restaurants. What caused her to open a restaurant, and what kind of restaurant?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So going back, and of course, Amy's going to have me do this. All of my very thoughtful friends have me go way back. So yeah, so if we go, really way back, my mom came when she was 14. And again, coming from that lifestyle of like, go out there and work, she actually went to night school back in the day, and she started working, and she worked in the restaurant business. And she actually also worked in a factory where they did clothing. Because again, that's what she knew. She knew those kind of 2 industries. About a few years into this and working, she actually graduated from night school. And then she actually really loved cosmetology. I mean, think about it, the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And so 60s and 70s. So she opened a beauty salon, and she had that for 2 years. And during that beauty salon, I would say age, she actually found a little spot next to where she had a beauty salon, and they it was a little restaurant. She's like, oh my gosh, because in Mexico we do these combo businesses.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, right? It's like you have the beauty salon, next to the beauty salon, you have a little restaurant, next to that you have a little market. That's just how it works. That's how we roll. So she's like, well, maybe I'll open a restaurant, because she's always been an excellent cook. So she opened a little taco shop. So she opened a little taco shop. It was called El Mexicano. And the name actually came from, and this is kind of funny, I'm going really deep and personal here. So my dad always said he wanted to go in business with her. So she's like, really? Okay. So Mexicano means the Mexican. And she's like, I'm going to open you a restaurant, and that's where you're going to work, since you always want to work with me. You salon and you have your restaurant. Well, funny enough, he actually didn't like the restaurant business.
Yeah, of course not, right?
Of course not, right? That's not how it works in marriage. You can't just open a business for your spouse. She learned that, of course. So what ended up happening over that about 6 months, when she had 2 businesses side by side, she realized she loved the restaurant business. She just loved serving. She loved cooking. She loved the community that would come in and spend time with her. And so she closed the beauty salon, and she stayed with the restaurant business, and she stayed with that for almost 30 years. It was close to 29 years and a half of basically a lifeline of her entrepreneurial lifeline was about 29 years in the business. Wow. Yeah.
Well, and that's still a risk even to close the salon. And just go all in on the restaurant. So yeah.
So during that whole span, let's just say she also had 6 kids. So she was a motherpreneur. She always obviously had a love and passion for family. That's what, she came from as well. So she had 6 kids. And one thing about my mother was, she worked really hard. She did do very well for herself, but that didn't mean her kids weren't going to work. So as soon as we were capable of working, in the restaurants, and she always would say, you go from toilet to register and not the other way around.
Okay. That is awesome.
Yeah. So we had to do it from the bottom up, which was good because we learned that, going from the bottom up. So she's like, no one is too good to clean a bathroom. So, okay. Right. And that's what we did. All 6 of us got a chance to do that. sadly, after those close to 30 years, kids, and you've heard this story, Amy, a consistent struggle was that structure. Like you said, even with the the entrepreneurial spirit, you still do need that structure. You do need that team. You do need, if possible, that education or bringing people in that are strong, that can really just create this, well-defined business, the systems, the processes, the team. She didn't have that education. She just graduated from high school, and she always struggled to bring people in that would really support her. So honestly, after almost 30 years, she just said, I'm kind of tired of this. Like, I can't build the team. I'm struggling with this. I've done enough. Her first 4 kids were old enough. I was the youngest of the first 4. I was 19. And then she had twin boys that were 11 at the time. And she just, it was a clean break. She's like, enough is enough. I'm either going to go and try to dedicate another 30 years to build a business, or I'm going to spend the next 30 to 50 years enjoying my life.
So this is a, maybe a harder question to answer. But maybe from your observation. So what do you think that it was? Because I do think this can be a mistake with people going into business, is like, I see it, I own a yoga studio on the side. Not a side, it's another business. So I see it in that industry and in a lot of clients where I love what I do. So it sounds like your mom, like, I love to cook, but it doesn't mean you're a good leader or a good business owner. So what do you think, like, as far as that aspect of running a business? I know she didn't have an education, but where in her leadership do you think she was losing people? From
I know clearly. Yeah. And I appreciate that question, because again, if we want to be real, but I'll be real. So she would try to bring in leaders that stated that they knew leadership. They would come from other companies, some were educated, higher educated, and they would promise her that they would help her with this thing that she didn't really know how to do, and that she knew she needed to have this business survive. She had hundreds of employees. She was taking care, helping hundreds of families also pay their own bills. So it was a lot of pressure on her. And so she did her best to trust people. I met her CPAs, I met her accountants, I met her management team. I met all of them, but I always also felt too, and I always remember, I'm a teenager here in high school, so I'm not all in, but I did feel like, I don't know, like, you've had this guy here for a few years now, and I don't really see any differences. It's still you running around, visiting. At one time, she had over 30 restaurants, by the way. She was still driving to all the restaurants. I'm like, is that what business owners do? Like, no, seriously, Amy, I'm like, by this point, shouldn't your team be at the restaurants, not you? Exactly. So I always knew something was not right. Like, I was smart enough, even as a teenager, to say, this is not right. You shouldn't be working 7 days a week. It was so hard to even spend time with my mom. That was the other thing. And so you're absolutely right. She trusted, which, many of us, in the service business, we're trusting people, right? So she trusted. She was trying to bring people in that knew more than her. And to be honestly, sadly, they didn't, because nothing really changed. So that was the big issue.
I think, I definitely, the first yoga business I had, I got in because of the studio I was going to. The owner said, oh, I just become a partner at a firm, and she read it in the paper, and she was like, I would love for you to be a partner here. I don't know how to run the business or whatever. But what I found was, at that time, I didn't know enough about the industry, because they could fight me on things, and I'd be like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, they're saying this class is an important class to have. I'm saying it's not making money, so I'm saying to can it, and they're telling me I'm wrong. So because I didn't have the knowledge yet, I couldn't argue on it. And I think too, like, what can happen in those situations is, like, she had the industry knowledge, they might have had the business knowledge, but she could have also been kind of pushing back on them too, of like, well, I know, like, she's the one with the passion, and
absolutely,
and the money on the line.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting you give that exact example, because I would sometimes, even at a young age, I would challenge her, like I had said, and I'd say, that doesn't seem right. Like, you're
Right.
wanting to bring people in. Shouldn't they be people like an expert in the restaurant business, but then also knowing your passion? They should say,
Right.
Maria, you don't need to be driving around
Right.
all day, like with, big cases of, taco meat in your car. Like that's no,
Right.
seriously, Amy, like that's not how you run a business. But she was still doing it. So obviously I can make a pretty strong assumption they weren't giving her that advice.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
she wasn't a pushover, but of course, if someone was like, no, you stay home on Sunday, I got this covered, she'd stay home.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. She would have liked to have stayed home.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
would have liked to have stay home.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what did your father do with all this?
So, really interesting dynamic, and I
Yeah.
don't share it very often, but the very interesting dynamic was they made an agreement really early on, which is very rare in a Latino, family household, that he would stay home with the kids.
Okay.
So he actually stayed home and took care of us and did the school activities and the sports activities. And she was, the entrepreneur, the breadwinner completely in the
Wow.
household. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a different dynamic, very different, especially where we were brought up. That was like unheard of, because we were brought
Yeah.
up in an area where it was predominantly, non-Latinos, non-people of color. So this was like a whole different scenario.
Yeah.
And to be honest, sometimes they'd be like, where's your mom? And I'd say, well, she's running the business. What do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. She's running a business and my dad's here. They're like, wow, that's different.
Yeah.
So
So is that something that caused you angst or?
not me per se.
Yeah.
My older brother, yes, because mind you, we were being raised in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and like
Right.
I said, that was a very extreme scenario, especially where we were being brought up. And so I would say for my brother, my older brother, who's now in his late 40s, yes, he absolutely, sadly had, some bullying there, and he dealt with a lot of that. The good thing was he had some really hardcore sisters.
Yeah.
So we were like, we're not going to have any of that, because we definitely
Yeah.
have our mom's, spirit in us. So,
Right. Yeah. So what was it like then because I grew up pretty similar, not with the father that was staying home, but my mom had 3 businesses, and you couldn't take work home,
Yeah. You know what it
so
was
they
like?
had to be at work at
Yeah.
the time. I worked at her office as well. She owned maid services.
Yeah.
So I understand that. So how was that for you?
Oh, well, it was the latchkey generation. And, I
Yeah.
think for a while, I'll be honest, I think we all kind of held that as a belief, like that's why we are where we are. That's why we want to be different, because we were latchkeys. We would come home alone. We had the key around our neck. That's the
Right.
latchkey ID, identification. That's like, yeah, you wear your key around your neck because you open your own door and you lock your own door.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, it was tough in regards to having to raise ourselves. And even though our father was supposed to be there, to be honest, it was more the nannies, that
Yeah.
took care of us. And so yeah, that was a huge absence in our lives, all the way up to my youngest twin brothers. As I mentioned, when she retired, when she chose to close her doors, they were 11. So since then they had my mother full time. So they literally had half of their childhood, kind of similar to my generation. And then the other half, they had their full-time mother, which was pretty amazing.
Right. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was tough. The one thing I will say, I think maybe compared, and I don't want to compare to other people that were in latchkey generation, but personally for me, was that I would go back to like, okay, my mom's not like hanging out, running around, playing, having tea.
Right.
Like she would take us on Sundays and we would see the families, and she'd have these big barbecues and you'd see them all eating together. And so I would see that and be like, okay, my mom's like, she's taking care of business.
Right.
So I understood. But yeah, there was times when I'm like, well, I wish my mom could be there.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of times, by the way.
Yeah. So how did that shape you as far as when you started picturing your future?
Such a good question. Just because I always kind of giggle back at it, where I first was extreme, like, oh, I'm going to be with my kids 100%. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to always be home, and I'm going to, do this and do that, as we always tell ourselves to be, extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But then I chose an industry I mean, for the first 10 years, I was in public accounting. And so obviously, I had tax season and I did taxes, accounting, advisory work. And so I had some really busy seasons. And so early on in my marriage, when I had my first two kids, I worked 6 days a week, during tax season, 7 days a week. And I kind of fell into that same lifestyle. The
Yeah.
difference was my office was only 10 minutes away versus my
Right.
mom had restaurants, sometimes
All over.
60 miles away.
Mhm.
So, but still, yeah, I was falling into that. And I'll never forget, about 10 years into my career, my mom had to have a sit down with me and she's like, not to say anything, but I could have sworn you said you were going to be,
Interesting.
yeah, you were going to be with your kids more, and that you were going to, and I wouldn't miss big things. I wouldn't miss school events
Right.
or sports and stuff. So yeah, so that's kind of where honestly my transformation started into education, and where I wanted to really find more fulfillment. And I wanted to remember what I had said was important to me when I started my career was my family. So, but I did fall into that. I fell into the grind, Amy, to be honest. I fell into the
Yeah.
grind. Yeah.
And why did you choose accounting?
So it was most definitely what really kind of profoundly hit me was, again, the struggle with my mom. Like, I didn't
Mhm.
understand how someone could work so hard and make really, really good money, could still be struggling. It did
Mhm.
not make sense to me. And I'm sorry, but I was like, isn't that what an accountant's supposed to help you with?
Right.
Like, aren't there supposed to be numbers being tossed around and
Right.
calculated? Like, I didn't really understand specifically, but I had a feeling that there should be a financial team, even if you don't know your numbers very well, that sits, especially when we're talking about big numbers, that there
Mhm.
should be a team helping you with that. And so I always knew that that there's something odd there. And so right out of high school, I said, I'm just going to do finance and accounting because I need to figure out how it's supposed to be done. Because in
Right.
my household, I don't think it was done right.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah. So then you started out, and I find this so interesting that your mom is the one who stopped you.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm guessing through this period of time, when she kind of got rid of the businesses and started getting immersed back
Yes.
into life again, did she have regret?
Yeah. So, it's still very difficult for her to talk about it. I mean, now it's been over 30 years. Can you believe that? It's
Yeah.
so amazing to think that. So, the first decade, it was very, very difficult. I mean, that was, in essence, that was her lifeline, is going
Mhm.
out and being around these businesses, being around these families. So, she completely engulfed herself in my twin brothers. Again, they were 11. She actually had a vacation home in Mexico. Her and my, at that time, it was my stepdad. My dad actually had passed, throughout this scenario as
Oh,
well. So she
sorry.
remarried, and really good. He's an amazing stepdad, and he helped raise the last two. And so they moved to a place in Mazatlan where was our one. Mazatlan is where was our one place we had our mom. Literally, she would take one thing she dedicated, and she always stayed true to it. She'd take 3 weeks off, like literally leave the restaurants, and we'd go to a vacation home we had at Mazatlan. Sometimes we'd take a couple of weeks throughout the year, but it was always the 3 weeks in the summer. And so I remember when all this was happening, my stepdad, her husband at the time, he's like, why are you stressing on where are you going to live and we're going to have to do that? No, let's just go to your vacation home. Isn't that where you said you want to be? Like, on the
Yeah.
beach? Like, that's where you always said you want to be. And plus you need that right now because you're going through a lot of anxiety. And so he just like whisper away, and the other four kids, by the way, were like, what? You're taking my mom away?
Right.
Are
Yeah.
you kidding me? So there was a few years of a lot of
Mhm.
issues there, because we just did feel like he just whisked my mom away to Mexico with my
Right.
brothers, the four older ones. Even though I was the youngest of the four, I was 19, the rest were in their mid-20s. That was shock. That was like a
Right.
big shock. But so yeah, so for those first few years, it was living in Mexico. My brothers were bilingual, they were going to school in Mexico. And then the summers, this was the worst part, that I guess my stepdad, now I get it, but because she was going through so much, he was a world traveler. And so every summer and every Christmas, they travel. So I'm like, well, not only can't we see my mom, but then you take her all over the world.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
what about us? Are we like chopped liver? Like what's going
Yeah.
on?
It's
So
hard.
yeah, it was, but now I get it. I get it. He had to
Right.
take her away from all of that and distract her. And so that was about 2 or 3 years. And then they settled down. The kids were in
Mhm.
high school by then. So they had to settle down because they had some really, really big commitments. My twin brothers, I still call them the kids. They would be like cringing right now. They heard that since they're in their mid 30s, by the way. So yeah, and then things settled down, and then we started doing our best to get back to normal and talk about things that really, really affected all of us, especially I would say the oldest four. We did have some things we've had to talk about over the years, because that we all took that moment of like leaving and breaking off so quickly. We all took it a little differently.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and plus you lost your father.
Yeah, and we lost our father during all of this as well. So
Right. That's a lot.
yeah, it was. I don't think about it, but yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah. So how did you know you were going to be okay without that
You know,
support system?
God, it's such a good question, because I don't really try to think about like how did I know? I just, I think the only thing I knew is that I had to keep going.
Hmm.
Like I knew that my older three, I was the youngest of the top four. They were really having a hard time. So it's like if I broke down, like
Right.
yeah, they call me the glue of the family. Like you kind of kept us together through things. So I kind of just had to be strong for them. And then I also had to be strong for my mom. I couldn't imagine what she was going through. She lost her first husband. Now she's losing her business. And yes, she has this knight in shining armor who's amazing, my stepdad. But like, imagine as a person, as a human, like I can't even imagine without like it just really getting into my pit of my stomach. So.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was talking yesterday to somebody who's considering, well, has been considering. Every time I talk to this person, they talk about they want to get rid of one of their businesses and how much they don't like it. It causes them stress and anxiety. So they're, talking to me about, mindfulness things they can do. And so I said to that person yesterday, like, get rid of it. Like, why are you holding it? Like, you have enough money,
Mhm.
in this other business. Like, why are you holding on to it? I don't know. I built it up to this. And then, takes the camera and shows me all the stuff they have in the office. And I'm like, it's stuff.
Yes.
It's just stuff. And the thing that's hardest about, like, just as much as going into a business, but letting go of a business, is it becomes ego, I
Oh
think,
yeah.
part of it. And it's also part of, it's like your right arm, because you grew up from nothing. And, I know when I sold my first business, I was depressed for like a couple of weeks, where it was something I wanted, but I didn't know then how would I define myself?
Yeah.
What would I, be saying, and who am I, kind of thing. And I can totally see after 30 years and now, like, I mean, your father passed, but also having older children, going through that myself, like, like, oh, well, that's a whole different transition too. And maybe she felt like she had missed so many years with you guys at the same time. And then this business is gone. Like,
Oh no, I'm telling you, Amy, it's interesting you just said that, because that's the one thing she would say. Because of course, even her siblings, her brothers and sisters, and us, not knowing that it would be a big question. But now that I think about it, it's like we would say, "Mom, so how do you feel? How do you feel?" And she'd probably be like, stop asking me." But she would
right.
say in Spanish, she would say exactly what we said. It was just stuff. Like it was
Yeah.
just things. I can get all that stuff back. And she's like, and she would say, and by the way, I don't want any of that stuff back. Like
Right.
if I got rid of it, like I want to keep it simple. So she is interesting. She did this whole 360 and she lived a very simple life. Like when you would see my mom for the first few years, she didn't like to go shopping. She was very simple. And she loved to paint. So a lot of times she would be in her, like, the painting clothes, because she's a
Right.
painter now over 30
Yeah.
years. And you would kind of look at her and you're like, wow, from like a woman every day, get up, pantyhose, heels, and now like in a painter's, dress
Right.
and just painting. It was like, what?
Yeah.
Sometimes you'd be like, are you there? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, it was, but now I get it. It's, I want to thank you, Amy, for having me even go this far back, because it's not easy actually, but
Yeah.
I see now like why she had to just go into her paintings and escape and travel and just be like, almost like she was like, yes, this is like the next step. Let me just do what I got to do to get through these next couple of years though, before I just feel like I'm going to lose it,
Right. Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so when she came to you and said, don't really make my mistake,
Yeah.
is what she was saying, right? Um, so what led you to make the transition that you did? So did you feel like at the time, and I think this is important too, in the world of public accounting, did you feel like you could speak up and not lose your career? Did
Yeah.
you feel like you had to leave?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just say, so it was a long time coming, meaning like I always knew what I wanted, but then
Yeah.
I also know I love the entrepreneurial life. I love
Right.
like when you're talking and we're talking and I'm getting goosebumps remembering what it was like in the hustle,
Yes.
like that does fuel me.
Yeah.
So what really kind of was always coming to me was, Mariette, I get it. You love the entrepreneurial life, but you also do want to not miss those times with your family, and you don't want to recreate the life you had with your mother and with your siblings, where you did always feel like you were missing out on that, that lifestyle of having a parent there and having those dinners and having my mom ask me, so how was your day, and tell me about your friends. Like my mom didn't know who my friends were.
Right. Uh-huh.
And so I always kind of had that. And then the thing is, I would try to rationalize, well, I am home by 7:38. And, I could ask my kids, but like they're tired. They're getting ready for school the next day.
Right. Yeah.
Like they don't want to talk to their mom at 7:38. And by the
No.
way, I don't really want to talk to them either at that.
Exactly. You're talked out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm 12, 13 hours in. So what really happened is my mom, a few years before my actual full transformation happened in 2015, is she started telling me, Mariette, I come to your house. I'm here for a whole week and we don't talk to each other. You're in your office or you're out of your office, or when you come home, you're in your home office. Like, I go to sleep. I wake up at 2 a.m. You're still there. Like what's going on? And so at first I was like a little offended, like, well, mom, I'm like you. She's like, that's the point.
Isn't that crazy?
Like, and she's like,
And you feel like
honey,
you're making her proud.
I wanted to make, of course I want to make her
Yeah. Yeah.
proud.
Yeah.
And she would say, she's like, I'm proud of you. She's
Yeah.
like,
But
trust
she
me, I
was
go to
that,
all
but
my
it's
kids.
funny. It's like the complaint you had about her. Now as an adult, she's like feeling like you're not involved with her.
Yes, yes. And it would be funny because she would be like, I'm going to my kids' houses. And it got to a point where she's like, I don't even want to come visit y'all anymore because you don't spend time with me. And like I think that's really was where it started hurting me. Like, oh my gosh,
Right.
I'm not like spending time with my mom. I'm probably not spending enough time with my kids. So that started happening around 2012 to 2013. She'd come visit a lot more after she went on her whole hiatus of traveling the world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then what actually happened is that, so I started feeling that 2014, I'm like, okay, Mariette, there is something not right here. I actually was like, I talked to my husband, my kids were at a really good age by then. They were 7 and 9. And I said, I need to get out of this. Like, I want to go to these conferences where people are mindful and they're, creating these, beautiful dream businesses. Like, yeah, monetarily we're doing good, but this is not a dream, like working
Right.
all these hours.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I felt like I was same thing my mom was doing, the only difference was I wasn't driving, all day long.
Right.
So I said, I need to invest. I need to get out of here. And so I said, I'm going to, need to go away, a few times this year, 3 days here, 4 days there. And I did that. I started going to conferences. Started going to retreats. And yeah, right away, Amy, like right away, people would be like, yeah, you don't have to work like that. There's other ways of running your business. And by the way, do you actually love who you're working with? Do you love what you wake up and do every day? And I'm like, well, like love it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I love what comes in from it. They're like, no, like actually, does it fulfill you? Because you're this passionate person and like you're all alive here. Do you feel like that when you're doing what you're doing? And so those kind of thought-provoking questions, I hadn't been ever asked that before. Mind you, I've been in business for at this time like 12, 13 years. And so that was it. I kind of started saying, okay, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a simpler way for me to do what I'm doing and still create this lifestyle I want. And then, so I was on a journey. I was on a journey already, like trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But it was in 2015 when I found out I was pregnant with James Oliver, my youngest. And I was like, okay, yes, I am not going to have 3 kids and have this lifestyle. There's just no way. I mean, I was 39 years old. I didn't want to do that anymore. And so I went all in and I made myself a goal. I said, by the end of this year, before I have my child, because I got pregnant in August, I had him in June. I said, I got to figure out like what my next 30 years are going to look like. I always go extreme,
Yeah.
So I've been doing this for about 20. What are my next 20, 30 going to do? So that was it. I kind of sat down. I thought about it. I had, conversations with trusted colleagues and friends, and they started mentioning, well, what about all this stuff you've been doing? You're always creating, you're always writing, you have courses, you have this and you're that. And, you're at that time, I was already speaking with the Intertrainer Writer Network. So I was already a public speaker and educator. And so they're like, education. And of course I went all in and researched it. And I'm like, wow, yeah, that's $1 billion industry. And so that's it. So end of 2015, going into 2016, I said, I am transitioning. I'm going to start my transition from practitioner to educator. It took me almost 5 years. And 2020 was my first year without a tax season. And by the way, I'm sorry for those of you that had it. And this year too, like, oh my goodness.
I know, what a good year to have transitioned.
Seriously, people would be asking me questions and I'm like, but I'm not doing taxes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Even though I was taking all the classes for them to help them, because the majority of my learning community are tax preparers wanting to implement bookkeeping and learn bookkeeping. So I'm still in that community learning, of course. And so, so that's how it was. It was the nudge, the going out there and learning from others in these retreats and these conferences, and then combine that with being pregnant at 39 years old. That was it.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and I think, when you have someone to look at like your mom, or you've seen an entrepreneur before, it's possible. And I think probably what you saw were her weaknesses, you realized I don't have those. Right. Like, and so I think for some entrepreneurs, if you've never had the example of an entrepreneur in your life, we've talked about it before, my mom lost her business because she didn't have a financial background, I believe, and didn't have the right accountant giving her advice during that time. But in my head, I was always like, if I ever open a business, I will not make those mistakes. Like I knew, but then there's things you can't control, like what's happened with COVID and things like that to a business. But, I would say the yoga studio for sure, because I've seen a business go down. I make sure it's cash protected, where a lot of business owners are living month to month.
Yes.
And so it is important that future planning, that business planning, like all those things, like even when you're taking a risk, that your exits as well. Like we talk about that in yoga all the time, like people that want to go up in a handstand or a headstand, we're like, no, your exit.
I love
if you're going to, come out of it. And it's really the same thing, like know where your safety exits are, so that you can, not that you'll know what things are going to happen, but how you're going to protect yourself so that it doesn't feel as scary.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. And I love that analogy or the example of the yoga like pose, because it takes me back to how how I do work with my community. I always tell them like, I know I share, I encourage you to be confident, step into it, but also like try to take yourself to, a few years out. And like, if you're there, and if you don't want to be there, if you want to have an exit plan or what comes next, like it's good to think about that as well.
Yeah.
And if all that is just like you said, planning and, and insuring yourself and taking care of the kind of the legality of things just to feel protected every day, that already is a planning strategy.
Right.
That's a planning strategy. So oh my God, every time I think about planning and thinking what's next, I'm going to think about someone in a yoga pose. Like,
Make sure you don't fall on your head.
Yeah, don't fall on your head. You need that for a while.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, well, so many great things in your story, and thank you so much for sharing so many personal stories within that
Yeah.
as well, because I think all of us, to break that, it's uncomfortable, and whether we realize it or not, a lot of times we are doing things to please someone, but it's really about us. Like a lot of times, anxiety and stress that we have is a lot of times we have to step back and go, is someone putting that stress on us, or I putting that stress on me?
That someone is me.
Yeah. And then how do I shift, and try to, because it's hard, because every day that still comes up, because it's a belief system. It's something that is within you, and you have to like intentionally break it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just add to that. I think, even though, my mom, trusted person, someone that obviously, we spoke a lot about her. So I really do hold her really high in my life, in my heart, and my soul. But I needed someone else. Like I needed someone else to kind of help me like break that. And I needed me to stop like saying, oh yeah, everything's okay. No, like not. So go out, go to your retreats, go to your conferences. It's not. And so that's why community, and I try to pull that in so much. And Amy, how much I want to help my community and share about them and encourage us to have these, leaning into a conversation like this. Like I said, I always, when I'm going to come into any kind of interview or podcast or, opportunity with my sisters, with my dear friends like Amy, just so I know y'all going to pull things out of me. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Yeah. But if it helps someone, if it, if it connected with someone, then that's all I want out of this.
Right. Yeah. So important. You do that. And I would say, having known you as I have, like you are a learner. So when you talk about not just depending on that one person you look up to, I mean, how we break belief systems is by watching others. It doesn't even mean they have to be an official mentor,
right?
Where, it's kind of watching things other people are doing and going, oh, does that resonate with me? Could there be another way? Being curious, and open to that learning process, which, Mariette is so good at. So
well, I love it. It's just, what? And I think that's it. And you know what it is? I want to pull out what you just said. It's curious. Like, I think, I, if anyone is not feeling curious, I would challenge you on that. Like, why have you lost that curiosity?
Yeah.
I mean, that is the lifeline of us, of our brain wanting to continue on. So let's figure out why we're not curious anymore.
And set in our ways, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great. Okay. So I'd like to end with some rapid fire questions. Yeah. So you pick a category.
Okay.
Family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Let's do money.
Okay. Things or actions that I don't have that I want with money.
Taking care of my money more often, which sounds really funny for me. More often than I already do. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that as an accountant myself, it's like, it's the last thing you want to do. It's like,
I've been doing tax deadlines for my whole life.
Yeah. Like
I know it's fine. I've already paid in.
Someone else do it. Things or actions I do have that I want as far as money.
That I do have that I want. So I would say the goals. So I have goals, I set them, and I want to continue to have those to be able to get and achieve where I want to be.
Okay. Things or actions that I don't have that I don't want as far as money.
That I don't have that I don't want. I would say, and I'm sure I do have them, but I probably don't let them come up to my mind. So any kind of beliefs that, wanting to have money or wanting to build wealth is greedy or is ugly or is bad. I'm sure they jump in there, but I try to push those out quickly. Yeah. I don't want to believe that. I truly believe that wealth helps everyone.
Yeah. Things or actions that I do have that I don't want.
I'll be honest, just things around my house.
Getting
Through
to where your
COVID.
mom was, where you're just
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
shedding.
through the
Yeah.
pandemic, I've actually looked a lot more on all the things we've gotten over the years. Obviously, I
Yeah.
have 3 kids and a spouse. So
Right.
a lot of things that I do have that I don't want.
Awesome. Well, is there anything that you want to make sure that people walk away with from this, or that you want to share about what you do before we end today?
Yeah, so I think I will share something I want people to walk away with. And I've already kind of shared it already with Amy is, when you can be around someone like Amy or someone that kind of pulls things out of you that you probably feel like it's going to either help you or help others. And it is an uncomfortable feeling. Let me be perfectly honest. I offer you to have those experiences. I'm sure this is going to be good for Amy. She's going to be able to share this, and that's great. But where the transformation happens inside of us is when we get to have these moments and we step away from them and don't realize like how powerful it was for both of us. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm sure there's people in your life, those of you that are watching, that maybe you can have that additional connection with, that real human-centered connection with. I just offer you to take that chance. Even call someone that maybe has an opportunity like this to share and ask them if they would be open to hearing your story, because you can change so many lives like that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being you and sharing your story, and so many great things you shared today that I think will help a lot of people.
Yay. Thank you.
And now for my mindful moments with my interview with Mariette, which there's so much to dive into here. And as you could see, Mariette is such a positive, joyful person, but has so much to share and give to the people around her, which makes her a great coach and supporter of her community. But her story of her grandparents being entrepreneurs and having 11 children plus an adopted child, and also her mother opening businesses, was such a tie-in to uh, how my life has gone too. So I had so much to relate to as far as growing up as a young girl and just seeing a woman achieve where you hadn't seen women have careers like that before. And I think it's very hard for people to go back and remember these times because things have changed so much. And, there's so many areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we have so far to go. But there are moments when you look back at those times and realize how far we've come in the last 40 years as well. And I had a mother that was in business as well. And, at the time of no computers and laptop computers and texts and emails and all the communication channels that we have today, the work that they did at that time was many late hours, many early mornings, driving from different locations. So I totally related to what she observed as a child and how much her mom missed because of being an entrepreneur. And even though her mom obviously was struggling with how much she loved her family and wanted to be there, it was a struggle because she couldn't put the right foundation in place in businesses. And this is something else that Mariette and I have so much in common, that we watched our mothers that did not have accounting backgrounds, did not have the financial background that they needed to make sure they were properly protected. And it's times like these, when you go through a pandemic, that you really see business owners struggle with the things that an accountant really should, accountant, bookkeeper, who's ever your financial advisor, should be having those kinds of conversations early on to make sure that you are thinking about the risks of your business and what are the gaps, how do you fill them, and making sure that you're planning for financial protection of that business as well. And so we talked about just that journey of watching her mother let go of the business and close her restaurants, and what a big transformation that was for her mother to go through that. And, her, having her own business and understanding how entrenched you get with a business, even if you don't intend to. You could have the story as a child saying, I will never do that. And then once you get in a career, sometimes it takes on a life of its own before you even realize it. And we talked about that it was her mother who had struggled with this so much, and watching Mariette work so many hours and have young children and so forth, that actually stopped her and said, don't follow the path that I went on. Like, make sure that if you are struggling with this and you feel like you want to be around more, take the pause and understand what would make you happy. And I think a really important thing about Mariette's story is that it wasn't drop everything, quit everything, and move in a new direction. It was learn and test things that might work as something that might be a good alternate route. And for many of us, that could take more time during that process than less. So when we are trying to evaluate other avenues to go in and evaluate the things that create the most passion in our lives and purpose, that if we did it as work, it wouldn't feel like work. If we're doing this as a side hustle while we have a job, while we have a career that we're trying to change from, it's probably going to take us extra time to do that. So we have to get our lives in order and properly prioritize the things that are not as important so that we are focused on where we're going. But it doesn't mean give everything up. It means find the path that you think will create the most joy for you and the people around you, which may mean that there are things that you need to let go of, like the amount of money that you might make today. Instead of looking at how much money could you make, instead it's like, how much do you need to make? And when would you need to make it? And would you have the cash to be able to balance your own business during that time? A lot of people that go into business don't realize the sacrifices that you're making in order to have, in quotes, the freedom of being a business owner, that many times you're working more as a business owner with less money. And it has to be that you believe in your purpose, that you believe where you're going, and it's providing you that personal life that you want as well, that personal balance that you want as well. And really understanding, her mother went through this and she went through this, is understanding it's just stuff that we have that we might be holding on to and placing an importance on things versus experiences, versus relationships. And so what you don't want to do is miss out on the things that are most important in life for things. It's what are the things that are most important to you? Step back, observe it, and then start designing your life to do that. Now, when we talked about designing your life to do that, we also talked about how important it was to have the support of people around you, but also create a community that will help you achieve your success as well. So maybe that's a community of friends and family. Maybe that's a community that you find online. Maybe it's a community that you become a member of. Whatever that is, of finding the support that you need to not feel alone as you go through this process. So make sure when you think about this is you understand when we make any change or move from any kind of belief system that we have, it can be very uncomfortable. And sometimes we have to sit in the uncomfortable to make the transformation. And when we make that transformation, at the end of the day, the uncomfortable parts were worth it because those are the things that pushed us. Those are the things that opened our eyes to possibility that we might have not even realized before, and also opened our eyes to what we need to let go of, what we need to release. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Mariette. Please share this with people that you think it would help as well. Like, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you have future topics or want to be a future guest on the podcast, please go to my website, amyvetter.com, and submit ideas for the podcast. And we will also provide you a free PDF when you submit that of my B3 basics of things that you can incorporate right into your day to help you get more present, to be productive, and create better energy for those around you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.